Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. We've come to the sixth session. In slide 1, we've entitled it The Prophetic Mission in Tazkiyah, because we want to tie into this section of the early hours in which Quran Murad is talking about the relationship that we should have to the Messenger of Allah in both understanding and commitment, and how it is that we should be looking at the Sunnah from the angle of self-development. And so the subtitle says relating to the Messenger, right? And that the prophetic mission itself is exemplified in the Sunnah. So the prophetic mission part of it, and this comes up in slide number 2 now, is to convey the message, right? And part of it is pedagogical, or is about education, teaching us the meanings of the Quran. And part of it is teaching us wisdom. يُعْلِمْهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. The Prophet ﷺ is teaching us the book and teaching us how to implement the book. Hikmah in the Arabic language is not just a concept of wise sayings. Hikmah in the Arabic language means an yad'i shay' ala mawdi'ih, to put things in its proper place, or to put a thing in its proper place where it belongs. And so to know how to implement is what we would say here in this case. And part of all of those processes is that they work together, because the task of the Messenger of Allah Ta'ala is to set that foundation for purification of the self. Another aspect of the prophetic mission, it could be presented in a different way, and at the midpoint of slide number 2, you kind of get a grasp of what's being communicated. And that's that the prophetic mission is to explain and to provide guidance, to teach the lessons and to show how to implement them. And that's unique in the prophetic process. It's not just the issue of information, and this is why a lot of us Muslims in today's time, we have issues, because we think that Islam is just an issue of having information. I have read that, I heard that, and we don't realize that in that there's no guidance. The Prophet ﷺ was sent to guide the people. Allah Ta'ala could have easily downloaded in everybody's mind, in everyone's heart, what the teachings of the deen were. They could have been inspired to understand instantaneously. But the human doesn't work like that. That process of development that's necessary for the human to undergo or to suffer. To suffer means to carry an experience, right, in this case. It's a process which is gradual. It's a process which is gradual. Just like our biological development is gradual. And this is where a lot of us have fallen short in our understanding of Islam. That we think that it's about just information. And what that has done to us is it just destroys us from the angle of puffing up our pride. So that we think that it's about, I know, you don't know, I understand, you don't understand. And we see that at times with our youth, and not only our youth, we see that at times with the community. And so, no, the prophetic mission is to guide in that process of development that the Quran is calling us to, in purifying the self and developing the self so that Iman becomes something practical. And so that is why we say that the prophetic mission is to explain the teachings and to provide guidance in how those teachings are implemented, right? To clarify the deen, to show how to implement the deen. Now we go to slide 3. So the prophetic mission overall is summed up in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, which we call the Sunnah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So studying the Sunnah, a fundamental part of it is to understand that it comes to clarify the Quran. It comes to teach us how to implement the Quran. The Sunnah can be defined as that which the Prophet did, that which the Prophet said. And also part of the Sunnah is that which the Prophet consented to with regard to what the Sahaba did and said. Because the Prophet ﷺ had an obligation to ensure that the teachings were clear and conveyed properly. And the function of the Prophet ﷺ in this case was to ensure that if something was done improperly, that they would be corrected. So when we say that the Prophet ﷺ consented to certain things, and that became part of the Sunnah, we're saying that that's part of the prophetic mission, that he allowed his students, literally speaking, to have enough space for them to be able to think about what it was that they were practicing and believed in. And those students, they took initiative. And so there's times in which when they're taking initiative, they're showing, where they stand on certain things as far as belief and action. And they're doing that in such a way that it's very clear to the Prophet where they stand. And so the teachings allowed them to have that personal space to grow, but the Prophet ﷺ still had responsibility to ensure that what they were thinking, what they were believing, what they were doing was sound. And so that process of the teacher allowing the student to demonstrate how well it is that they comprehended the lesson and so on and so forth is part of the Sunnah. So the revelation of Allah wa ta'ala gives the Prophet authority not only to teach, but also to correct and legislate and so on and so forth. So we have to understand that the Sunnah is the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regard to how to understand and implement the Quran. And we know that the Quran came to speak to the context in which it was revealed in, and within that context to correct those aspects of the culture of the Arabs which was problematic. The Quran filters culture, positive aspects and negative aspects. And that which is negative or contradicts the teachings has to be discarded. That which is positive, if it affirms the teachings, can stay, or if it's neutral, no problem. But the Quran ultimately is applied to context, and this is what we're seeing in slide 3. The study of the Sunnah is about understanding how to apply the Quran to context and how to work through culture. I want to make a point here that's important. I gave the example of Jahiliyyah, or the early generation, or the Arabs, I said in a general sense. Radiallahu anhum ajma'in. When we talk about the Sahaba, we see that they were a body of people that went through that process of purification of the self. But one of the things that we want to talk about is that in that process of purification of the self, we all have our own personal cultures. So aside from the culture that we carry from our communities and our families, in society, we have our own personal culture. And so part of that culture are things that are problematic, and part of that culture are things that are okay. And so we have to see that about our own selves and how it is that the Quran is addressing us in that regard. In regard of what is it that we do that is acceptable, what is it that we do that's not acceptable. Calling ourselves to account on that level is important if we're ever to see any change in ourselves. And this is one of the issues that we have in today's time, that education is too focused on ideas and not on the transformation of the self or even society, right? And so the issue that is before us is one of transformation. In these few minutes that are left, we want to focus on the fact that the Sunnah teaches us that the sweetness of Iman is experienced by that person to whom Allah and His Messenger are dearer than all else. And for that person who loves a human being for Allah's sake alone. And for that person that hates returning to unbelief after Allah has rescued him from it, as he has been rescued him from it, and also because that person has been saved from the hellfire, so to speak. And this is based on the hadith that's found in Baqarah or Muslim. And so there's some issues here, which is the first, the love of Allah wa ta'ala, the love of humanity, and to hate that which is problematic in values and teachings, right? And to not want to return to a lifestyle which is going to destroy us, right? And so the love here that we're talking about has to penetrate our hearts, right? And it has to be one in which it reigns in our hearts, just like we talked about the issue of the heart being full of dhikr and the remembrance of Allah wa ta'ala. That's important. So is that type of love for Allah and that and the messenger and that willingness to change, which is fundamental to the tarbiyah process, but also that love for humanity, and so this is where we see that this program of tazkiyah is not about just you. It's not about affirming the ego. It's about reaching a point which we can be solid in our relationships with Allah, with ourselves, and with others, right? And so the prophetic mission, it was about, warning. It was about bringing good tidings. It was about inviting. It was about communicating, reminding, and teaching, right? And so it was about enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, establishing the deen, establishing justice, right? It was about making sure that good has dominance in terms of good deeds, that good deeds dominate over bad deeds. It was about being a model community, a witness community. And so the tazkiyah process in the prophetic period, it built a community. It just didn't build individuals that were focused on their own personal growth and development and achieving Jannah, but it built a community of individuals that were focused on their personal growth and how it was that they impacted others, right? And so that's important to understand. Imam al-Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayhi, says the same thing. He talks about the importance of understanding that our relationship with Allah wa ta'ala is not just limited to acts of ibadah such as salah and dhikr and the recitation of the Quran and giving charity and making hajj and so on and so forth, everything that we're commanded to do at an individual level. But that fundamental is the way that we deal with each other and interact with each other. And that's something that's key. Abuse of others, especially with the tongue. Some of us have that habit. We think that we can just speak to people any way that we want, and it's unfortunate. And it gets worse when we have position, because then now that leadership position becomes a position that's securing a space for a person that doesn't know how to treat people, right? And so that we find that at the political level, at the interpersonal level, we find that in a lot of different sectors and segments of life and society. And so the hadith illustrates clearly that the prophetic mission, it talked about going inward, right? The teachings of it, what's going on in our hearts and in our minds and our emotions, what's going on with our actions, to go outward, not just to focus on ourselves, but to go outward into action, implement the teachings. And then how is that we engage with one another, right? That's what we mean by going outward, right? That what is it that we do in the world? How is it that we exemplify the teachings? And so the Sunnah gives us that practical understanding of how to implement the teachings of the deen. The Prophet ﷺ, he had the mission, and that within that context, it was not just to convey the message, it was also to teach the Quran, to teach how to implement the deen, and to assist in the process of purification. So Islamic education is about explanation and providing guidance. Trying to exemplify a real model is what the goal of the Muslim community is, of what Islam represents in values and practice. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.